Holy Spirit, shape us to be such a people that when your message comes to us, we say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Amen. This morning's texts are contentious, to say the least. Both Paul and Jesus seem to be quite upset, I think with good reason. And it definitely comes through in the texts. Jesus with his lament about Jerusalem, and the Pharisees with the warning that Herod wants to kill him, and Paul with his letter of tears, coming back to tell the people of Philippi about enemies he sees amongst them. And I want to get into a bit of why they are upset, and then sort of what comes of that. First, in Paul, in his letter, we have his perennial problem, which is in the background of almost all of his letters, and big chunks of each of the letters. But he doesn't always spell it out. Like when we read Paul talking about enemies of his message, whose God is the belly, and whose glory is their shame, and so on. Like it sounds like an external attack. At least in my reading, on the surface level, it sounds like they're coming after us as persecutors, which was also happening. In this case, though, we're pretty sure that Paul is talking about an internal threat. See, at the time, the early church, and for decades, the early church was divided on the issue of whether you had to become Jewish before you could follow Jesus. And so on the one hand, you had people who said, yes, you do, mostly centered in Jerusalem. Many of the original disciples who became apostles were on that team, so to speak. And so they would found worshiping communities around the message of Jesus, and they would tell people who were Jewish, the Messiah has come, and this is who he is. And they would tell people who weren't Jewish, you have to become Jewish because this is a Jewish Messiah, and we're going to look at Jewish scriptures to learn about him, and so you've got to be Jewish to be part of this. Paul, on the other hand, and a few other people, like over time, Peter kind of switches the teams, and then Paul has his own kind of team of newer apostles. And for Paul, he goes and he sets up worshiping communities around the message of Jesus, and he says, everyone can be part of this worshiping community, whether you are a Jew or a Gentile. If you're a Gentile, you can join, and you don't have to become Jewish before you can follow Jesus. So what would happen is Paul would found a community of his type, and then he would move on. And then this other team would come to that community and tell them, oh, look, you guys, this Paul guy has it wrong. Actually, all of you have to become Jewish. And they would contend with his message. And then he would hear about it later, because of course he's writing to Philippi, not from Philippi. He's probably from jail someplace else. Most of his letters, we think, were written from jail. And so he's writing a letter to Philippi, frantic and upset, like, don't listen to these people. They're not telling you the truth. They're not giving you the message. And so they're present, in the text, but he doesn't name them. He says, imitate me, not them. Remember what I taught you. Don't listen to what they are teaching you. In Luke, Jesus, his concern is much more on the surface. Herod wants to kill him. Herod is not the only one. And the Pharisees are coming to, I'm not sure, warn him, taunt him, threaten him. It doesn't say exactly why they're telling him Herod wants to kill you, but they are. And Jesus, obviously upset about this, calls Herod a fox, and then gives kind of he alludes to his mission in the world, but doesn't spell it out, as he often does. And then he goes into this lament about Jerusalem, essentially Jerusalem, like, what is wrong with you? You kill the people that God sends to you, and you do this not just now, but in the past too. You've got like a habit of killing the people who come to you with God's message, or if not killing them, then certainly driving them out. And of course we know, and maybe Jesus knew, or suspected strongly, that he would be on this list. of prophets that would be killed when they came to Jerusalem. I imagine it was at least a thing he thought could happen with all these threats on his life and knowing that he would need to come to Jerusalem at some point once again. And so we have an early church that is torn by internal conflict over theological issues of welcome and inclusion, and also is dealing with a present and a past that they spent persecuting and even killing truth tellers that were sent to them. So I know that no one here hears anything familiar about that, but I just want you to understand the context that they're coming from. So immediately I started thinking about, why are we like this? Why are we like this? Because obviously, to me, this is a very familiar situation. We are still the kinds of people, periodically, who threaten and denounce and exclude and even, yes, sometimes kill the prophets who are sent to us. And we are still the kind of people who are divided periodically by bitter infighting about issues of who can come, who's allowed to do what, who's welcome where. Right now, the United Methodist Church is at the peak of this conflict, so much so that they're in the news. We were in the news 3 or 4 years ago, similarly riven. The Catholic Church is tearing itself up over their own issues. And so why are we like this? Why is it so hard to just listen to the truth tellers and get along with each other? One of the reasons I think that it's so difficult, in particular in this case, to listen to the prophets, the truth tellers who come to us. Because prophets don't come to tell you a comfortable truth that you already know. They come to tell you something that might sound like bad news initially. It may not immediately strike you as good news. Prophets are people who tell you the hard truth. Stuff you don't want to hear. Stuff that is, it's not welcome. It's not a fun job, I imagine, to be a prophet. Nobody wants to see you coming in the door. But one of the things that makes it difficult to hear the prophets is that their message is so frequently, genuinely frightening. And when people get the message from God directly from an angel, the angel always begins by saying, "Do not be afraid." Because God's message for us is sometimes frightening. And prophets are those kinds of people who have a frightening message. In the Old Testament, the prophets would say things like, "You long for the day of the Lord, but the day of the Lord is darkness for you and not light. It's judgment and not rescue. You are in trouble. You are afraid of this army camped at your gates. Well, yes, they are here to destroy you. Not only that, God sent them." Nobody wants to hear that. It is a genuinely frightening message to hear that the things that you have done wrong have consequences that have come home to you now. And here they are. And here are the things that you've done wrong. People in power in particular do not like it when someone shouts their wrongdoing in public. They do not take well to that. And they will do what they can to silence a prophet. But even those of us without a bunch of particular power have trouble hearing this message. Prophets are uncivil and they're impolite and they're disruptive. And worse yet, in the ancient world, prophets would craft their message into catchy Hebrew poetry that people would be able to remember and recite to one another for hundreds of years, to remember what you did and what happened. It's like someone making a hit pop song about you and how you screwed up. And then everyone remembers. And they sing it to their kids and to their kids. But if we are not willing to be disrupted and even frightened, then we will never have ears to hear God's message. We'll miss it. It'll pass us by. Another reason this is so hard to understand the way that God welcomes people we wouldn't welcome, is that this message is actually difficult to comprehend. Like, it involves unlearning so many things that we have learned from other sources. And the text that we have to help guide us through this isn't even written in English. It's written in ancient Hebrew, in Aramaic, and Koine Greek. Not even regular Greek that you would learn as a classics major in college. A different kind of Greek called Koine Greek. Not what Aristotle and Plato wrote in, for example. And so we have to come to this text and we have to wrestle with it. We have to argue with it. We have to fight with it. It is hard to get the meaning and the insight out of this text. Like when someone tells me that the Bible has a simple answer to a question, I'm immediately a little suspicious. Like, I'm kind of like, did you do your homework? Like, have you put the work in? Because it's not easy. It's not simple at all. That huge thick book, for example, that Jewel was holding, is only one volume of the Interpreter's Bible commentary that I have in my office. There are 12 more volumes of that. And I haven't read them. They're really super thick books. And even if I had read them from cover to cover and comprehended them, I have now absorbed 1/billionth of what is out there about these texts. Like, you spend your whole life learning, and it still won't be enough. And you will always be surprised. But if we are not willing to put in the hard work that understanding demands, we will never have ears to hear the message God has for us. It'll pass us by. It'll go right over our heads. It'll go in one ear and out another. And so we find ourselves in the same situation that the church was in Paul's time, that Jerusalem was in Jesus' time, again and again and again. Paul said, all people are welcome to follow the way of Jesus. But the majority weren't hearing that. Jesus and the prophets said, God's judgment is looming over you for your wrongdoing, in particular against the poor and the vulnerable and sojourners, foreigners living in your land. People weren't hearing that either. So, the next question is, why does this matter? Like, why would it be worthwhile to have to summon up the courage to be disrupted and to have to do all of this hard work on top of all the other hard work that life entails? It would be much more simple if Sunday was just a time when we come together to get recharged so that we can go through the rest of the week feeling positive and having plenty of energy, maybe hearing something inspirational. I wish I believed that. That would be so much easier. That would be so much easier than what we actually are here to do, as I understand it. We need to hear and understand this difficult and frightening message to us. Because there are other messages out in the world that are competing with this one that people are hearing loud and clear. Once again, it feels like sermon malpractice to not talk about our most recent mass killing. This one, if you haven't heard about it, occurred in Christchurch, New Zealand, where a person published a 74-page white supremacist manifesto and strapped a camera to his head so he could record what he did. And he went to 2 different mosques and gunned down 50 people, at the current death toll, as I recall, and injured another 48. All caught on video, with this 74-page manifesto giving his reasoning, and hopefully for him, his hope is to inspire other people to do the same thing. That's why a person like this publishes a manifesto. It isn't for his health. It's to inspire others. And he heard messages loud and clear, including messages originating from the United States. Perhaps you've heard these messages, that there is a scourge of people invading our country, that they are coming here to take away our way of life, that they are coming here as immigrants and as refugees, not white ones, of course, but all the other immigrants and refugees, and that they are a terrifying menace that are coming to this country to harm us, to harm our way of life, to harm our culture, and that we are under threat and we have to defend ourselves. Perhaps you've heard this message. I certainly have. I've heard it from every corner, ranging from the news to conversations I have with people. Now, I have not, at this stage in my life, I don't have ears to hear that message. But other people do. And they're listening. And some of them are going to act. Because this is not the first person to have taken this message and turned it into a massacre. And it will not be the last. Unfortunately, I think we all know that. So do we have the courage to listen to the prophets then and also now? Are we committed to doing the hard work that is required to hear and discern God's voice? And when we hear it, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to share it? Are we going to shout it out? Because as always, those with the ears to hear will